Hey, what's up everyone? Jeff here again from Vanity Fear. We're going to be doing part 2 of Inside the Mix with Parasite Eve. Alright, thank you so much for coming back. We are again in my Logic Pro session of the Parasite Eve cover. I have taken the liberty of hiding all the unnecessary tracks just to kind of declutter this workspace right here. So what I've got currently on the screen is my kick drum bus, the bass bus, and the rhythm guitar bus. So today we'll be taking a look at the tones of the bass for Parasite Eve, that relationship between the bass and the kick, and then the rhythm guitars. We'll talk about some EQ moves and what I've been doing in the past and currently to achieve some of the guitar and sonic results that I've been getting out of my mixes lately. Alright, so we'll be focusing on this breakdown section coming out of the first chorus. This is about at the minute 20 mark of our Parasite Eve cover. So in context, alright. So to achieve the bass tone that I did achieve, I was using the Eurobass plugin from Submission Audio. Fantastic plugin, really great. Another great one is the Easy Bass plugin by TuneTrack, which I've more recently picked up after this cover. I think it sounds even better. So I think going forward for demos, writing, things like that, I'll be using the Easy Bass maybe a little more. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Out of the box, though, I was blown away by it. However, Eurobass is still really, really capable. What we're looking at though is a rendered bounce in place. That way I don't have to use the Eurobass plugin when I'm writing more parts of the song or mixing more parts of the song. So it's an attempt to eliminate CPU usage. So when you have a lot of tracks in these sessions and you don't have some big dog studio 64 gigabyte 12 core, Mac Pro or something like that, every little bit helps. So I like to render my tracks in place, bounce them in place. It frees them up of all the plugins that are attached to it, and it just declutters the CPU usage that you're always fighting against when it comes to digital audio workstations. So I can't show you the plugin in this session, however. Eurobass, if you want to look up that plugin on your own if you're interested in it, Eurobass by Submission Audio. So with that said, let me turn off some of these EQs and treatments, and we'll take a look at the tone on its own. So it's good. Don't get me wrong. I like it. It's got some grit to it that I added, but it definitely sounds a little too digitized. So to kind of combat that, I'm adding a decapitator by Sound Toys. Fantastic plugin for adding drive and grit. It also has high cuts, low cuts, so it has some EQ and tonal options as well. I'm using this to kind of tame some of the high end and add a little bit more like grit to it to warm up the overall signal. So let's hear that again without it and with it. So it's just warming it up a little bit. The other treatments I'll be turning on will overall add to the sonic result of the bass and the bass bus. But right now, so far, it's definitely warming it up a little bit. The virtual mix rack on, which is just a little bit of some EQ boosting in the mid-range. And I've got some compression going on here. This is a virtual mix rack from Steven Slate Digital. So with that said, so still nice and warm, love it. I've got a Fab Filter on the bass bus. I've got a Fab Filter Pro multiband compressor, and I'm only using it slightly in this, let's see, 65 hertz to about 237 hertz, so nothing too aggressive there for sure. I've got my Fab Filter Pro Q3, which is a fantastic EQ. I've got some very aggressive moves here. shaving off some low end, cutting here at 115, bringing it down a little at 6.4 at 640, boosting a little bit in the mid range at 24, and another big cut here at 6,000. And that's going to play into that bass and kick drum relationship that I'll talk about. Let's turn this on. And finally on the bus, I've got a Finality compressor from Joey Sturgis Tones. I'm not hitting it too hard, only at -8 on the threshold. Pretty slow release. Nothing too crazy on this one. All right. But it does improve the overall tonal characteristics with that on and off. So with it off and then on, it just punches through the mix a little more so than what just adding volume could do on its own. All right. So let's hear that in context again with the rest of the instruments. All right. So that bass and kick drum relationship that I mentioned, this is where the Fab Filter Pro Q3 shines, in my opinion. It allows you to survey and analyze different instrument groups, which is a fantastic tool to be able to use. So for example, this is my Bass Bus Pro Q3 plugin. I've made these moves based on the not the Pro Q3, but I've made these moves based on the frequency spaces that the kick drum are taking up or utilizing. So for example, down here, I've got Kick Bus highlighted because Kick Bus already has a session of Pro Q3 installed on its channel strip, which is a requirement to analyze it. So now I've got that highlighted. So when I hit play again and I solo out the kick and the bass, I will see the frequency relationship between the two. So you've got my moves here on the bass, and then you're going to see the frequencies of the kick, which will be highlighted in red. So where I've made these cuts is exactly where the kick drum is peaking the most in its frequency ranges. So by cutting out in those spots, I'm allowing the bass to be able to breathe a lot more, and it's not stepping all over the kick drum. So it's not going to have that woofy, boxy, muddy feel to it. And I'll solo that and A/B it so that we can hear the difference that just those cuts make right there. All right, so again, with it engaged. And off. To me, that's drastic. That is huge, especially when you're talking about gluing two instruments together in a mix, and you're at the same time you're trying to glue everything else together in the entire mix, right? So any small little decisions like this you can make between instruments that have dynamic relationships, do those early and often so that you can start to have a mix that's as glued together as possible by the time you get to the end of it. So this is just one example of that type of subtractive EQ. And when you're considering the frequency space of other instruments that share frequency spaces themselves, such as the kick drum and the bass guitar. All right. So let's hear that again in context and without. In context with the Pro Q3 turned on and turned off. Big difference. Forewarned. All right, context. So to me, the bass is not dropping out. It's just tightening up inside that frequency space. Because with the Q3 turned off, it sounds woofy, boxy, muddy, all those things I described earlier. And it just doesn't sound very controlled. And so that's what you're looking to have, is that controlled, tight sound. So the Q3 is definitely a great tool to have. Fab Filter, recommend it. All right, guitars. So I'm a Kemper Profiler kind of guy, and if you're not familiar with what a Kemper Profiler is, Google that, Kemper Profiler. It's a modern digital amp profiler. Modeler is kind of an insult because it doesn't model guitar amplifiers, it profiles them. So it has all kinds of wizardry and sorcery when you plug it into stuff, and it captures the tonal characteristics of any said amplifier and then regurgitates that back to you in one fantastic, pleasing tone. So yes, it is a digital snapshot of an analog amp, or it could be a digital snapshot of a digital amp. Hey, whatever you want to profile, sky's the limit, right? But still, at the end of the day, it is a digital working solution for, the recreation of analog guitars. Honestly, I've been using Kemper for almost 5 years now, and it's my go-to studio tool for anything guitar related. I've got the amps back here to pick and choose as I want to use them, and I do. However, it's really easy to use the Kemper Profiler. So that's my writing tool of choice, tracking tool of choice as well. And for Vanity Fear material, it's also what I use. Brandon employs a few different methods. He will use some plugins from STL, which I am also a big fan of, STL Tones. Andy James has a plugin that we like to employ. The Tone Hub, Lee Malia has a pack from Bring Me the Horizon. So we play around with that stuff, plus the Kemper, to eventually achieve the Vanity Fear sound we're looking for. So the guitars I use in this are not any kind of rapid departure at all from the stuff that we already use. In fact, they're the same 4 main amps that I choose for Vanity Fear: a PRS Archon, a Rev Generator, a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier, and an Orange Rock Reverb. And these are my 4 go-to tones for Vanity Fear material as well. So I only thought it to be necessary for me to use those in this cover. All right, so for the rhythm guitars, so solo these out, talk about them, and then we'll work on the rhythm bus, and we'll take a look at the EQ moves that I made to get these guitars sounding a lot more glued and tight with the mix. So soloed out in context, what you're going to be hearing is the Archon main left, the Rev Generator main right. I got that dual rectifier and the Orange Rock Reverb left and right, but these are pulled back. So usually in choruses and stuff, I'll quad track guitars. I don't always quad track guitars on other and all rhythm parts, but for this, I wanted a big sound. So I'm bringing in 2 mains and then 2 alternates essentially that are taking up frequency space somewhere else. They're sharing some frequency space, but they're not dedicated fully to the left or fully to the right. So I think you can get a bigger sound with your 3rd and 4th guitars if you don't hard pan them left and right. Maybe stick them up the middle. Maybe, kind of come off center a little bit, and maybe -20, but I go with -40 on both of these. And these things change from session to session. But that's kind of a go-to method that I've been employing lately on things. So again, these are lower in volume because I don't want them to be on par with the main guitars in volume. It's not what I'm trying to achieve. They're essentially just backing up the main guitars, giving them a little more weight, and just helping them support the performance. So let's hear them soloed out, and then I'll start pulling out some of these and putting them back in. So my guitars are typically mid-range heavy. I want a lot of mid-range poking through the mix. When guitars are too scooped, then they just get lost in the sauce. So I like to poke a lot of mid-range, but all that starts at the amp. I don't do a lot of EQ or compression moves on my guitars unless I really have to. Mostly it's subtractive EQ, and I'm pulling bad frequencies out of the actual tone, right? So I think it all starts at the amp. So if you can get a great tone coming out of the amp, you're just going to have less to do in the mix, and that should be what you're going for. So let's hear the Archon main, the Rev Right main by themselves. Now let's hear the 2 alternate guitars by themselves. So So these two by themselves, I don't like the tone at all, but when I combine them with the Archon main and the Rev main, they please me. All right. So let's take a look at the rhythm bus. All right, so oh yeah, this one had some really aggressive subtractive cuts. I'll actually pull these back up so I can display for you why I was removing these frequencies from the mix. Usually I always start with a low cut on instruments that don't need to be taking up space in the lower frequency ranges, and I usually take some high end off the top too, because I don't want the guitars to be too harsh. But let's take a look at these frequencies. Let's pull these back up. 241, let's pull that back up. 853, let's pull you back up. 2750, yeah. All right, cool. All right, so let's just turn this off, turn this off for now. So I always go hunting for subtractive EQ opportunities, just pulling out frequencies or noises inside a guitar tone, a bass tone, a kick drum, a snare, whatever, just runaway noises that I don't want. So for example, let's listen to, this is all the guitars as a whole on the bus. Let's hear what we're talking about here with this frequency amplified, obviously, as right before we decide to cut it. This plugin is really fantastic because you can solo out the frequency that you're hunting down. It takes out that main tone and just focuses on that actual frequency that you're dialing up, and then you can turn it on and off if you like. But there's a lot of, it's got this woo sound to it, so instantly that's something I want to pull out of the mix because it's contributing negatively to the overall tone. Let's hear it again. Pull that out. All right, moving on to this one. Let's hear what she's got. Oh, just nasty. 854, let's pull her down. All right, and last but not least. So that runaway frequency is, or that runaway noise is just contributing negatively to your overall guitar tone, especially in this session. So let's pull that out too. Oh, that was rough. All right, we'll play it in context without those mix moves, and then I'll put it back on. We can see what it sounds like. So it's not a huge sonic difference, but when you're being meticulous in a mix and you want to extract the greatest sound possible from your performances or your tones, then subtractive EQ and going fishing or hunting for those runaway noises and frequencies are they're gonna lend itself, very well to the end result of your mix sounding, completely badass. So I definitely recommend anyone out there that's getting into mixing to go hunting for those kinds of frequencies. All you gotta do is just take your EQ, right? We'll just do a quick little example. Let's solo out the rhythm bus, and I'm gonna be doing these broad sweeps, large sweeps, exaggerated sweeps, just looking for frequencies I don't like. So right away I found some. You could do this all day. You could be pulling out really, offensive frequencies, but obviously you don't want to start, completely killing your tone, obviously. But I look for the most offensive, the most egregious repeat offender types and pull those, just yank those out of the mix. Typically they reside around here in my experience. right in the mid, and right around the, this mid-rangey area right here too. So yeah, recommend you do that. It'll go a long way to improve your mixes. All right, so that kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about today. The bass tone, what I use to get it, some mix decisions toward it, its relationship with the kick itself, and how you can work to control that and tighten it and really benefit or create benefits for your song, so that your song just is it's not overly bass heavy, woofy, and you're just making room for various instruments that occupy some of those spaces within the frequency spectrum. And then the guitars, just recapping, we use a lot of Kemper primarily and STL plugins, and we'll look more at that. I'm going to do a session later where we talk about some reamping and what I'm using to reamp and what that reamp process looks like when Brandon sends me something that he tracked using X and Y plugin, and we want to either increase or improve the tone, or just put something else on it that he may not have had access to at that time. So that's the world we live in. We live in this digital realm where you got a lot of digital solutions, but at the end of the day, a lot of it just sounds so fantastic, and I'm always excited to be a part of this world and where we're at with it right now. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate you sitting down with me and watching me and listening to me run my mouth about this stuff. I really like to do this and talk about it. It brings me a lot of happiness to be involved in this project, just involved in music in general. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks for all your support. Continue to follow Vanity Fear on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Stay tuned for more stuff coming out. Love you guys. Appreciate it.